Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sarah from Only Human Therapy. And this morning I wanted to talk about stress. It's a huge topic, so I'll do well to try and fit it all into the time that I've got this morning. Um, Thankfully, I did get a lot of responses from the poll that I'd put on about what people wanted to cover. And so that's why I wanted to do stress today. It is very closely linked with anxiety, which I'm sure many people know. But I'm going to sort of talk about, so there's the structure of this morning is I wanted to talk about the relationship between stress and anxiety. So what stress is, what the physical manifestations of that can be, what the sort of, what's it called? Sorry, Monday morning I'm a bit slow. What the implications of that can be, so how it can impact you. And so I've got my little spider diagram here and I'm struggling to concentrate. So, stress. Right, here we go. I'll start again. So I was going to talk about the physical characteristics of stress, the things that you can do to help prevent it. Hi Lee, hi Heather, thank you for joining. How work can have an impact on stress. The relationship also between being stretched and being stressed, because that's quite different. How our environment can impact our stress. Obviously, that can be anything from the work environment to environment at home, so your family environment. So yeah, I'll make a start because I think these points that I've written down to cover are all quite interlinked. So it probably won't necessarily flow because I'll just talk about one thing and then that'll remind me to mention something else. So hopefully you can hear me okay. Right, so what is stress? Please also interact and ask any questions if you've got any questions, guys. I want to, as much as I talk, I want you to be interacting with me as well. So please do, interrupt me if you've got any questions. So I'll start by just explaining what stress is. And people may or may not know that there is, anxiety is almost directly linked to stress. So people often who suffer from anxiety think that that is a separate illness in itself, and it's not really, because anxiety is, it's a direct result of stressful situations. So if you think about, sort of accumulative stress, you can, some people might experience one very stressful event or a very traumatic event, for instance, and be absolutely fine. Whereas if you've had a lot of smaller stressful life situations, that can be, that can have much more of an impact and lead to quite severe anxiety. So it can be about the number of stressful events rather than the severity of the stress, if that makes sense. So I did have a quote somewhere here that, no, it'll probably come back to me in a minute. So I just wanted to mention actually as well that anxiety is not a weakness. It's a human response to stress. So a lot of people think that if they're an anxious person, then that's some sort of weakness, but it is a normal response. And it's actually a response that's designed to help us. So if you imagine when you were a caveman, you weren't, but imagine our ancestors are cavemen. The brain needed to be able to, feel anxiety and fear in certain situations to be able to survive. And so that's why we evolved to have those kind of feelings. It's, hi Jade. It's important to, to be able to do that, because if we didn't feel any stress or anxiety at all, then how would we survive? It's, so just remind yourselves of that when you're feeling something. It's not all bad, it's not negative, and you can actually use it to help you and use it in situations where you can benefit from that. So I'll talk about, you know, how to use it in a more positive way. So how many people feel, I mean, would you perceive yourself as being stressed, or do you think you're stretched? Because they're quite different things. And a lot of the time people will be experiencing the feeling of being stretched and think that they're stressed. So being stretched is actually a positive thing. It's, you know, it's something you feel when you're learning a new skill. You're, Lee says sometimes, yeah. So it depends. You know, we change all the time depending on what's going on in our lives and how well our own needs are being met. So being stretched, as I say, is a positive thing. Being stressed is negative. And the difference with the two is that when you're being stretched, that's a temporary kind of feeling towards a goal. So if you're working towards something, you're being challenged, but then there is some sort of end to that goal. Whereas being stressed feels like it's just an ongoing thing that you're not going to get to the end of. It's, you know, you're feeling too much pressure. And also you find that if you're being stretched, you can act on that quite easily because you're wanting to, you've got that motivation. Whereas if you are being stressed, you're actually shying away from responding to things, and you're losing that motivation because there's too much. And so as I've said, you know, anxiety is a direct result of chronic stress. So if you're continuously experiencing stress or putting yourself in stressful situations, then that can lead to anxiety. And I'll just reply to Lee's comment here about she says, I find at times I get stressed around being a single mum. Absolutely. I bet almost everyone who's listening here who's a single mum would agree with that. It's, you know, that's a perfect example of how your sort of home situation can put pressure on you and make you stressed. Yeah, she says endless demands. You know, there's going to be a lot of external factors playing in that example that you've just talked about. But the things that are in your control, the things that you can respond to, are the stresses that you put on yourself, so the pressure that you put on yourself. Unfortunately, we can't control a lot of those examples of, you know, external factors. Hi, Eden. Sorry, my friend Jade and Eden are listening. Eden wants to see Aria. Aria wants to see you too, darling. We will see you soon. So I've gone off track there because I was thinking about saying hello to Eden. What was I talking about? Being a single mum. Sorry to go off track. So yes, the only thing, unfortunately, that we can control is our own response to stress and our own emotions. So a lot of you, well, people who know me or have worked with me will probably know that I talk about the serenity prayer a lot. And that's about focusing on things that are in your control. So Lee's just said there, absolutely true. We have to stay focused on what's within our control. And that is key, because if you forget that, you can so easily get mixed up and get sort of really, really worked up in trying to control your external environment, which is only going to cause you more stress. So absolutely key to remember that, what's in your control. So what I will do in a minute is talk about, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Human Givens approach, talk about emotional needs, because that's where you can, you know, learn how to regain control, focusing on what you might be lacking, or what you need more of, what there's too much of in your life. That's where the energy needs to go. So now hopefully you're a bit more familiar with the idea of that being stretched is different to being stressed, and being stretched is actually good for you, because it gives you motivation, whereas being stressed is actually counterintuitive. It's, you know, people say that they thrive on stress, love having a stressful job, some strange people, but that, you know, it really, it's not helpful in any way, shape or form. You're just putting yourself at a higher risk of mental illness. And so what is stress physically? You know, that it can be different for everyone. I'd be interested to know, actually, those that are watching now, could you just, you know, type even one word or a couple of words? How does stress manifest for you personally, physically? For me, it's usually I get the butterflies in my tummy, or feeling sick, I go off my food. So it's, you know, it affects my sleep, for instance, all those kind of things. But as I say, it's different for everyone. So some of the physical things, yeah, Jade said stomach pains and sickness. So, you know, similar to mine, actually. It's the reason this happens is because your body's actually producing the stress hormone cortisol. So when that's released, your body is preparing itself to fight. So it's preparing itself for fight or flight, which is actually what we would need if we were, you know, in caveman times, where we've got to hunt, find our food, or we're at danger because we are prey for something else. You know, it's so physically that's what's happening in your body. And the cortisol not only physically stops, you know, it doesn't stop, it makes your body focus on being prepared to fight. So things like digesting that we're normally doing would stop, and that's when you feel sick or you have stomach pains. You can physically be sick. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with these comments here. Heather says she feels impatient and snaps at people. That's completely normal, and again, that's something I do in that situation as well. So what's happening in your brain when you're stressed or anxious is that your the sort of thinking part of your brain, rational part of your brain, is being compromised because there's too much emotion, too much flooding in. So what happens is you actually get what's called an emotional hijack. So the things that you I mean, the hormones play a massive part, but the emotion basically floods the brain, and that stops you from being able to think rationally. So you will snap and you'll say something quickly, or you'll do something irrational, and then after it you might think, oh God, I regret that, or why did I do that, why couldn't I control that? And it's because this is a natural response to stress, and your brain actually responds to emotion before a thought. So it is completely normal to do that. It's only then after that that you can analyze it and think, okay, well, what's happened here? You know, it's nice to see lots of people joining and liking. Thank you, guys. So what's happening in your brain is that you're having some sort of, let's say it's a trigger or an activating agent that happens. Then you have an emotion associated to that. So that could be good or bad. But in this instance, we're talking about stress. So that, let's say it's a negative emotion. So that's happened actually before you're consciously aware of anything. It's only after that that you get the thought. So the thought is you knowing that you've responded to something in the wrong way, or, oh, why did I do that? Like, that was completely irrational. And it's known now through the research, actually, that human givens have done, that anxiety or stress makes us stupid. And I know that you might think, well, why am I telling you that? Because it's not very helpful. But it is, because it helps you to understand why you might do certain things. So when you are feeling stress or anxiety, it actually cuts off parts of your brain that would normally be useful to you. So If you've ever wondered, why you can't remember things when you're stressed, that's because of what's going on in your brain. You, like Heather mentioned, she might snap. You, as well as the memory loss, you have sort of a black and white type thinking style where you can't understand perspective, and so something's either right or it's wrong, it's black or it's white. These are the kind of not personality traits but thinking styles that are associated with stress. So actually I wanted to read out quite a few of them, because it's just useful to know that you're not on your own. When you understand more about this, you'll be able to identify it and recognize it now when you are in that situation, and just knowing that that's a normal response will help you massively. Yeah, Heather says definitely experience memory loss. It's really useful to know actually that other people are experiencing this, because you're not on your own, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It's not a problem. This is why I'm doing this kind of thing, talking to you, because I want you to know, the more the more background you know about this, the more you can do to help yourself. Sorry, Jade says manifests in her stomach. Sorry if I've missed any comments here. Hi, Mandy the camel, good old friend. So here we go. I'm going to read out a few thinking styles that you might recognize in yourself when you're stressed. Black and white thinking I've mentioned. So self-focusing, this is what especially women and mums do a lot of. You think that your life is worse than everyone else's. Blaming other people or blaming yourself, just as unhelpful. Jumping to conclusions, exaggerating feelings, catastrophizing, having to be perfect. I am very guilty of that, especially as a mum. Obviously, we want the best for our children. We want to be the best we can be for them, and it's so unhelpful. The more we're putting so much pressure and stress on ourselves to be perfect, but also the media is doing the same, and all that's doing is setting ourselves up to fail. If we've got unrealistic expectations, unrealistic goals, then we are setting ourselves up for failure, which just promotes more stress. I'll get to your comment in a minute, Rhiannon. Thank you. Taking a position, so that's about it's similar to black and white thinking. It's about there being one or the other. Exaggerated feelings, actually, or exaggerating feelings, is really prominent when you're stressed or anxious. So a couple of examples of this. So anxiety makes your heart rate go up a bit. If you're exaggerating feelings, you might think, I'm having a heart attack because I'm having palpitations, or I'm going to have a heart attack, there's something wrong with my heart. An example of exaggerating the feeling of being a bit nervous, I can't cope. Another exaggeration of having a headache would be, I might have a brain tumor. So these are the ways you can quite easily see how you can turn a little bit of stress or anxiety into something really bad. Another one, obfuse, I don't know how to say this word, I'm sorry. This is about assumptions. So if somebody, for instance, if you're expecting somebody to text you and they didn't, you might then think, oh, well, they didn't text me because they don't like me and they've fallen out with me. So you're exaggerating again. and putting yourself down, those are just some of these sort of unhelpful thinking styles that it's useful to be aware of. So those are things that you wouldn't necessarily normally do, but when you're put under pressure or stress, they might occur. So if you can identify with some of those and you notice yourself doing them, then perhaps you are experiencing stress rather than being stretched. So that's something that you might need to address. I'm just going to respond to Rhiannon here. She says, I feel like I've had so much stress the last couple of years, which I had to just push past and get on with that. Now things are a bit better. I can't even deal with a tiny normal amount of stress. I'll just read her next one before I respond. I've had to give up driving because I felt like I was going to pass out, getting pre-fainting warning signs, shaking, sweating, ears ringing, etc. Now, I'm sorry to hear about that because you have, by the sounds of it, had a horrible time with it. This definitely sounds like a situation where stress has developed into anxiety. So there may have been, like you've said, there was a couple of years where you've had a lot of stress. So perhaps what's happened here is a cumulative stress has then turned into anxiety. And it sounds like actually you might have been experiencing panic attacks. So that, that does have an impact on your ability to concentrate, and especially where you mentioned driving. I think it's a good idea that you've recognized that that was having an impact, so you've not tried to carry on. That's really good because you've been aware of yourself. But I think what I would recommend here is to practice 7-11 breathing, which I can explain at the end. I've talked about it to probably all my clients actually. 7-11 breathing is a really great way to calm yourself down quickly. Don't practice it whilst you're driving because it can make you feel a bit lightheaded if you're not used to doing it. But basically it's designed to slow your heart rate down, lower your blood pressure, and just calm you down, because your mind will run away with you, especially when you have experienced stress. You can almost become sort of conditioned to respond to stress, even if the stress isn't there. If you have built up an accumulative amount of stress, then you might be doing something called pattern matching, where you're responding to stress when there isn't actually a stress there anymore, if it has been in the past. So Jade says, yes, 7-11. It's, if you're not practicing it, then you should be. It's amazing. So Rhiannon, I hope that's, answered, well, not, it wasn't a question, but I hope that I've responded a little bit to you in that way. I'll come back to this at the end if I have time, because I've got a lot to cover. And so what might happen is that I answer some of the questions within what I was going to cover anyway. But if not, then I'll come through all the comments at the end. Just have a bit of my coffee. Lovely. Another lady I've worked with saying 7-11 is brilliant. I will, Rhiannon, I will put in either a link at the end, or I can message you to explain 7-11 breathing, or I can email you about it. That's absolutely fine. I've got some MP3s as well that I can send where you actually practice it to a track that's designed specifically for that. So it kind of has a tempo with the track to practice the breathing to. Anyone else got any physical manifestations of stress for them? So some people mentioned, feeling sick, stomach ache, or butterflies in the tummy, problems with stress. Sorry, not stress, problems with sleep. I'm feeling restless, snapping at people. We have mentioned quite a few there. I just wondered if anyone else has any other, any that might be different. Stacey says headaches. Absolutely. That's usually sort of a combination of the effects it's having on your sleep can give you headaches, but also the levels of of hormones within your body and the level of cortisol whizzing round, can manifest in headaches. Again, one of my clients says that her medical condition flares up, so it becomes worse when she's stressed. And that's actually a really interesting point that's related to what I was talking about in my live last week when I was talking about sleep and the impact of sleep and illness. Stress or anxiety is exactly the same in that respect. So the more of that you are experiencing, the worse illness can be, or the more at risk you are of becoming ill. So you might be more susceptible to things. And so if you have a pre-existing medical condition, that will be worse when you're experiencing stress. So I just wanted to talk, sort of link it a bit more now to emotional needs, and the fact that there are certain, as I've said, there are certain things within your environment that you can't control, but there are aspects of that you can. And for instance, if you imagine a toxic environment, so that's an environment that is negatively impacting on you. That could be a situation that you could remove yourself from, or it could be a situation that you kind of lower your exposure to. So a lot of people can identify with this if they're thinking about work. A lot of workplaces can be toxic environments. So is there any way that you can talk to somebody to change that environment? Can you make it less toxic in any way? And likewise, if that's your home situation, how could maybe look at how you can change that? Sometimes people's environment is so toxic that they have to remove themselves completely, and that's sometimes the best option. But it just depends on your own situation. So I know we've got some single mums here listening. They have identified that they were in a toxic environment and they have removed themselves from that situation, and that's the best thing for them. So well done for that. That's a situation that you are in control of. But some parts of our external environment are not, we can't control. It's only, like I said, it's our emotional responses that we can control. Just catch up with some of these comments here from Rhiannon. All of those things you mentioned. Had a few nights of waking up in my own bed with no idea where I was, then convincing myself I was crazy. Exactly what you said about exaggeration. Yes, our imaginations are very, very powerful. And unfortunately, fortunately, but unfortunately, people who experience more anxiety and stress, we have more sort of advanced and more intelligent imaginations. And these are examples of how we're using our imagination in the wrong way. So that's something I'm going to come on to talk about actually in a minute, because imagination is it's one of our resources as a human being. It's something that we can use to help us, yet we are very good at using it in the wrong way. Lack of motivation, again, that's key to, that's related to a lot of our other emotional needs. So I will come on to that again. And it can also be related to depression. So sometimes when you've had this accumulation of stress and anxiety, it can lead to depression. So that's something else we need to be aware of. Make sure that we're looking at all of our needs. How do you know if it's a toxic situation? Well, you can monitor how it makes you feel. If there's a situation that you perhaps you don't like going into, but it might be that it's a bit of a challenge, which is good for you. If there's a bit of uncomfortableness, but then a feeling of sort of satisfaction, then that's not a toxic environment. That's more an example of being stretched. But if there's an environment that you are regularly exposed to, which makes you experience any of those symptoms that I mentioned, where the physical symptoms, or if it's making your mind exaggerate, putting you under pressure, in a negative way, then that is a toxic environment. So I hope that's answered your question a bit, Rhiannon. I will try and carry on relating back to this with my explanation of emotional needs and resources. So those of you that are not familiar with the Human Givens approach, it's about the theory that all human beings are born with the same emotional needs and the same resources. So we all come into the world with the same chances of survival, let's say, and that is that's impacted on or acted out based on a combination of how we use those and our external environment. So emotional needs are things like the need for privacy, the need for security, the need for control, those types of things. But the resources are the things that we can actually use to our advantage. And the needs, we need to look at ourselves to see how well they're being met in our lives, because you can go along, bobble along in life, not knowing that one of your fundamental needs is not being met, or you might have one that's met too much at the compromise of something else, for instance. So it's really useful to always be aware of how balanced your needs are, because as soon as one need is out of balance, you are putting yourself at risk of experiencing problems. So for example, if somebody, you could have two people who experience the exact same stressful life event. One person, that could then cause them to have some sort of psychotic breakdown. Another person, they might just have a couple of days off work and then go back to normal. Same situation. And the difference would be, the reason that one person can cope and the other person can't is that the person that copes would have all their emotional needs met in balance, and they would be using their resources effectively. The other person could have a need that's not being met, or several needs not being met, and they may be using their resources ineffectively. So what this means is that the more you know about your emotional needs, the more you are in control, basically. Because as I've said, there's not a lot of situations that you can control, but what you can control, what you need to focus on, is your response to stress. So we cannot, when I'm talking about prevention and things, we can't prevent stress, really. We can prevent our response to stressful situations. Hi, Yolanda. Nice to see you. So I'm going to just mention the emotional needs. Some of you I know are very familiar with the Human Givens. One of my diploma buddies is here, Lee. So she will know what this is all about. But just to mention, I mentioned a couple of them. Your emotional needs, the essential ones, there are 9, I believe, if I remember that correctly. So these are the things that you need to sort of strive to get met in your life. Look at where you can improve them or where they may be lacking. So we've got a sense of autonomy or control, which I mentioned already. Security. Attention. That one is about both the receiving and giving of attention. So you can have, if you've got one and not the other, that's still not balanced. You don't want to be giving too much and not receiving enough, and vice versa. Emotional connection. So this one, people often do confuse it with intimacy, but it doesn't just have to be about intimacy. So if you haven't got a close relationship, romantic relationship with someone, then that's okay. You can still have emotional connection with people. You can have that with a family member. You can have that with a best friend, for instance. So don't get hung up on being emotionally connected with one person romantically, because it doesn't have to be that way. Privacy, that's about having time to reflect, some sort of opportunity to reflect. If you don't get any privacy, which I know as mums it's very difficult, especially single mums, you need to have some time within your week, or when they've gone to bed, when they're having a nap, where it's just you and you don't have to do anything, you don't have to respond to anybody, you can just be alone with your thoughts and yourself. Likewise, if you have too much of that, which is classic with people with depression, then it's not helpful, because if you're withdrawing constantly from friends or community, then you're cutting off other people around you. That's compromising other emotional needs as well. So it's all about balance. That's what you need to remember. A sense of status. So a sense of status is your perception of status. It's not about how other people view you, but it's your perception of being valued as a person and being accepted. And a sense of our own competence and achievement. So this kind of that can prevent low self-esteem and low confidence, and it's quite closely linked with what I mentioned about the whole concept of being stretched and stressed. So when you're being stretched, that's good, because you're challenging yourself to motivate you towards something, and that is an example of having a sense of competence and achievement, because you know that you've had to push yourself to get that goal. And a sense of meaning and purpose, that is one of the most important ones, I think, for a lot of people. If you think about having no meaning in your life, then you're going to have no motivation. You need to find things in your life that give you meaning, whether that's being a mum, doing volunteering work for charity, whether it's your career, whether it's one of your hobbies. There needs to be something there where you don't just feel like you have to get up every day and turn up and do the same thing. You're doing something that gives you meaning. And then, so moving on to our resources, this is also known as our innate guidance system. So if you imagine, like I've said, everyone was born with the same emotional needs and resources. This is your guidance system that's designed to help you get your needs met, and it's designed to help you be resilient in stressful situations. So some of the things here are the ability to add new knowledge to our innate guidance system, sorry. So that's the ability to learn and to remember things. Because if we didn't learn from situations and didn't remember, then we would constantly be starting again. So it's useful to do this, but we often use it in the wrong way because we remember negative things. But actually, if you think about it, if you learn, that a certain berry is poisonous, for instance, that's a useful thing, because you're not going to then go and try and eat it in the future. You're going to learn from that. So the ability to build rapport and a powerful imagination, this one is massive when we're talking about stress and anxiety, because the imagination is used in the wrong way when we're feeling anxiety or stress. We imagine worst case scenarios. We imagine bad things from the past. We are almost putting ourselves in a different place in our mind. And so when you can learn how to use your imagination as a more positive tool, then you're able to actually eliminate anxiety and stress, because it should be used to problem solve. That's what it's designed for. So practice using it in the right way. The ability to think things out, so think rationally, analyze and plan. That's related to what I was talking about at the beginning, where anxiety and stress actually cut off that sort of logical part of your brain and stop you being able to do that. That's why we forget things, we snap, we make silly decisions, you experience confusion, and that's all to do with the emotion getting in the way. So the more you can, obviously you cannot prevent the emotion at the time, but you can change how you respond to it. So again, I'll give you some more tools in a minute. I just want to get through these resources. Another one is the ability to understand the world through pattern matching. So that's essentially what that means, is through metaphor. That's something that we human beings are very good at, and that's what kind of separates us from other species, is that we have the ability to do that. And the ability to step back into our observing self and be objective. So the key word there is objective, and also perspective is a really good way to describe it. So the more you can do that, step outside of yourself and look at things from a different perspective, the less stressed you will be. And the ability to dream. So when we're dreaming, we're actually discharging unexpressed emotions or expectations. So getting a good night's sleep is another fundamental sort of issue with stress. So I'm just going to not write down, I want you to write down an exercise, a little exercise to just go away and try when I finish this live. So I'd like you to write a list of everything that you've got going for you. So be really thorough. No skill is too small. Just write down everything you've got going for you. So you're reminding yourself of the resources that you've already got, and there will be many. These are resources that you've already got to help you. And so by doing this, you'll actually be able to access those resources more easily. If they're bringing them to the forefront of your mind, not only are you reminding yourself of them, but you're creating the opportunity to be able to actually access them. And that will help with your confidence. It will help you think more positively and more productively about your future. So you will be more resilient to any stressful situations that might come your way. Any questions up to now before I move on to the next section? I'm going to have to hurry up because I have taken 42 minutes of your time already. So that was emotional needs and resources. We've talked now about the physical characteristics of stress, a little bit about what toxic environment is. So being aware that you're not putting yourself continuously in a toxic environment, which is going to increase your stress levels. Exercise, I've talked about that. So the exercise, I want you to just go away and try. So I'll just talk a little bit now actually about goals, because goals they can be really, really good for us, but they can also create more stress. So when I've mentioned things like being a bit of a perfectionist, for instance, you're setting yourself goals in that scenario that are too unrealistic. So you're setting yourself up to fail. When, for instance, you set yourself a realistic goal, a positive, achievable goal, you're going to be increasing your confidence, increasing your motivation, and decreasing your stress levels. So when you set a goal for yourself, I want you to imagine that it has to be a positive goal, it has to be an achievable goal, and it has to be related to some sort of emotional need. So if for instance you write down a goal now and then analyze it, and if it's not related to getting one of your emotional needs met, then it's not going to be it's not a useful goal to have. It's not actually going to be helping you in any way. So that's goals. Another goal I would say to you, actually, a goal for everyone to go away and do, is try and laugh more. Because laughing not only is great for us physically, it psychologically has so many benefits, and it releases the opposite of the stress hormone, because you're releasing happy hormones, and therefore you know, allowing your body to kind of release any tension. So go, you know, watch something funny or have a laugh with a friend, go to a comedy night or something. Try and see the funny side of situations as well that would, you know, might normally seem or be perceived as stressful. See if you can turn that into a comical situation. I'm not saying go away and don't take anything seriously, but just, you know, it's all about balance and taking things with a pinch of salt. The more that you can kind of have the ability as well to laugh at yourself, the more resilient you'll be. I know it does seem hard for some people when you're in a horrible place. That is really difficult. But someone said to me actually when I was very poorly, they said, "Fake it till you make it." And at the time, I didn't agree with that. I didn't think that was the right kind of advice. But actually, it really helped me. I pretended to smile even though I wasn't happy, and I pretended to laugh at things. And I did fake it till I made it. You know, it started to change because I was in a situation where I was, you know, very poorly in a mother and baby hospital with my daughter, and they told me that the more, you know, she saw my sad face, the more she saw me crying, that was going to have a negative impact on her. And so obviously I didn't want that to be the case. So even though inside I was really hurting and I was feeling horrendous, I had nothing to smile about, but I wanted her to see that. So I was forcing myself to look at her like this and try and be all smiley. Like I wasn't pretending I was okay. I was just visually, I looked happier, you know, and that thankfully started to help. Well, it was one of the many things that started to help. But usually I don't agree with affirmations and things because you know, they're about saying things that you want to be true that are not necessarily true at that time. That didn't work for me, but the actual physical act of, you know, of pretending to be happy or laughing more, that helped for me, but it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So that's for your goals for you. We are nearly coming to the end now. Another thing that I thought it was useful to mention, because this can help towards prevention of stress, is something called the 3 Ps. So these are qualities or personality traits that kind of determine your susceptibility to stress or mental illness on a whole, actually, but particularly stress and anxiety. So the 3 Ps are personal, pervasive, and permanent. So I want you to think about these in terms of how you might respond to a situation. So I think there's a really good example in here actually somewhere. This is one of the Human Givens books that I'm referring to here, by the way. I can't remember where it was, but basically, so these, if we were put these words into a question, and then I'll think of a situation. So how personal do you perceive something? How pervasive is it to you? And how permanent is that? So let's think of a partner leaving us. That's probably something that everyone's experienced at some point. That's not a very nice experience. So how personal do you take it? What that means is, did you think it was my fault? They obviously left me because I wasn't good enough. That's an example of somebody taking it personally, when actually it could be nothing to do with you. It could be because they met somebody else, and that's not actually to do with you. It could be that they want to spend more time traveling, for instance. You know, there's always other perceptions and other perspectives that you can look at things from. If you only focus on how personal that is to you, then that is going to determine how much stress and anxiety you get from that situation. So being aware of these 3 Ps, being aware of how you're using them or how much you're using them, is directly linked to your resilience. So that's personal. Pervasive is how much does that impact your life? So I kind of like to imagine it as a bit of a domino effect. Does that one thing then affect everything in your life? If it does, then look at how pervasive you're viewing things. So using that same example that I just talked about, how pervasive would it be to your partner leaving you, for instance? If you're taking things or thinking about things very pervasively, then that scenario would mean that that was going to affect your whole life. So in reality, it might affect a portion of your life. It's not going to affect every single decision you then ever make. And finally, the permanent one is kind of self-explanatory. How permanent is something? Again, using that example, you might think that you'll never ever meet anybody else. You'll never fall in love again. You'll never be able to have another relationship again. That's thinking permanently. So you can use this in any example, but if you think about it in terms of stress, when you come across a stressful situation, you can remind yourself of these 3 P's. So permanent, pervasive, and personal. So question yourself and think, right, am I taking this too personally? Is there another option? Am I thinking about it in a pervasive way? Am I thinking about it in a permanent way? And challenge yourself, because quite often there's always other reasons and other other factors at play here. It's not just your perception, but the more negatively you use those 3 P's, the worse impact something will have on you. So just be really mindful of that. And another thing that I've used with clients, actually, and I've used it in a group session, is to tell people to do more and think less. Because if you don't act on something and just do some more thinking and worrying about it, you're only going to be feeding that cycle. So the more you can do where you're focusing outwards, the better. And I'm going to, before I just refer to the last few comments here, I'm just going to leave you with a quote, which is, action conquers fear. So it's no good just kind of saying, I'm stressed, feeling stressed or anxious. That's not helpful. You need to actually do something about that. Got loads of little faces whizzing across the bottom. So Rhiannon says, I was thinking about the fake it till you make it thing. I read about it ages ago and was planning to sit in my car listening to comedy shows or something to remind me it's a fun place to be. Perfect. Absolutely try that. There's no harm in trying it. And if your stress is specific to being in a car, for instance, at the moment, then that's something that I could work on with you if you wanted to do one-to-one sessions, because there might be some sort of rewind technique that we could use there to help with that. Especially when there's a stress that's very specific, like post-traumatic stress disorder, that's actually a lot easier to deal with because it's a specific event, and that's not so much somebody's perception of stress, because it's something that's external, and it's our own perceptions of stress that are actually more damaging in the long run. But there's no reason why you can't go and try that. And that's a perfect example, because if you're listening to a comedy thing, you're actually practicing what I told you to do about laughing as well, and just taking things a bit less seriously. And even if you just tried going on a short journey to begin with, don't put yourself under pressure to do too much, because again, you're setting yourself up to fail. So set yourself a small goal, a small achievable goal. And crikey, I've done 4 minutes. I expected to be about 40 minutes, but it is a big topic, this, and I'm just going to check through my notes while you hopefully can send in any questions or comments whilst I do that and make sure that I've covered everything. Oh yes, I've just met another thing that I didn't mention then that is related to perception and kind of using your observing self. If you experience something that's not very nice, some sort of stressful situation, it's important to remember that then doesn't identify you. That's not part of your identity. It's just something that happened to you. And the more you can separate yourself like that from problems, the better, because you're then keeping your sort of needs and resources intact. Rhiannon says, I'm not sure if it's specific to driving. I've not had a bad experience in the car. It just seems to be triggered a lot when driving. That's, you know, again, that's quite common, and maybe it's just a fact that that's how it's manifested with you, and that's kind of representing the stress, and you had an accumulative stress over a few years, as you've mentioned, and so it was a physical response to the stress that then caused problems with your driving. So I think it is related somewhere, but it's not that you, like you say, it's not that you had a particularly bad experience driving. It's just that the effects, sorry, of your stress then impacted on that. So I think it would be, you know, it might be useful for you to do 7-11 breathing, definitely. But looking at your emotional needs now and seeing which ones are being met, or which ones may not be being met, and what the balance is like. So you might find that there's one thing that you can really obviously see that's not being met, and then if you work on that, you'll gain confidence. But it's important to do that first before kind of trying anything, because you don't want to go away and do something that I've suggested here that might not be right for you, because it's about your emotional needs. So I think what would be useful is for me to post something when I finish now. I'll post an emotional needs audit, which is something that the Human Givens Institute created, and they use that for you to answer questions about your emotional needs, and it'll help you be able to identify what needs working on, basically. So you're very lucky that I'm giving away all this for free at the moment, because I just want to get this information out there and get people talking about it and being aware of it. But this stuff is the kind of thing that I would normally do in a therapy session. So just be aware that I don't want you to go sharing this with loads of people, because it is a service that I offer, a paid service, and I don't want that to sound like I'm putting anyone off, because I obviously want to help, but this is very important stuff that, you know, you're lucky that I'm sharing it with you now. That's kind of what I mean, and I hope that doesn't sound wrong. I've not said it in the right way. But thank you guys. I better stop now because it's almost an hour of me babbling on. So thank you so much for listening, and I really hope it's been helpful for everyone. We've had a lot of comments this morning, which is awesome, because this is only my second live, so I'm really pleased that everyone's tuned in and, you know, sat here for an hour to listen to me. I wonder if Eden's still watching. She probably got distracted playing something. But really nice to have both new people here and, you know, people that I know through the Human Givens or through my work. Any more questions before I go? It's a pleasure, Jade. Pleasure. I've enjoyed it, and I will comment with these things that I've said. I will. So about the 7-11 breathing and the emotional needs audit. Oh, Eden kept talking to me through the screen, bless her. We'll see you soon. Okay, right, bye guys. Talk to you soon.